Today I will show you how I make this beautiful ring. I start with straightening out my 18 gauge wire. I prefer to use copper-based wire. I find it's easier to work with. It's more firm and less bendable than aluminum wire. So when I have my wire straight, I measure 7 inches and cut 2 pieces. The ring in this video is a size 9.5. If you're making a larger size ring, you may want to cut the wire to 8 inches just to have a little extra to work with. Then I take my 26 gauge weaving wire and I wrap it twice around one of the 18 gauge pieces to secure it. I line the second 18 gauge piece with the first and I start my pattern. I'm going to link a video in the description showing a more in-depth tutorial of this weaving pattern if anybody needs some additional assistance. It's actually a really good video. It helped me learn when I was learning how to wire wrap. So I do recommend it, and that will be in the description again to show how I'm doing this pattern. But this portion of the tutorial is customizable to whatever pattern or weaving style that you may like for your ring. In this video, I'm trying to keep it basic. I'm just doing a simple 2-strand weave. But if you wanted a thicker band, you can always experiment, give this a try with additional wires to allow for a more intricate band and weaving style. I myself have made a ring with 4 strands, and while it came out beautiful and I really love the details on the band, I just feel like it's a little bit too bulky for myself. But if you're making more of like a masculine ring, or if you're making, a more chunky style ring, I would definitely recommend trying this out with a couple extra strands and see what you can come up with. When you're starting your design, you're going to want to leave about 2 to 2.5 inches on either side of your 18 gauge wire. You're going to need the space at both ends for the design later on. So basically this weaving pattern is going to be centered on your 18 gauge wire. And this part of the video can be a little bit repetitive, so you can skip ahead to about 4 minutes and 5 seconds to see the next steps. But basically you're just going to continue on with this pattern. I like going back through with my flat nose pliers and just kind of squeezing everything together, making sure that my pattern is tight and neat. The needle nose pliers are perfect to ensure that your pattern lays flat. I also use my thumbnail to keep pushing the pattern back together. I try to be mindful when I'm creating any design, whether it's a necklace or a bracelet, but most especially with rings. You have to remember that this is your band. So if you have a small little piece of wire that didn't lay flat or didn't get tightened enough, and it just leaves like just enough of a ridge to it on the edge, that would drive you crazy if you're wearing it as a ring. So just be mindful as you're creating this that you want your wire to be pulled as tight as you can, of course without breaking it, but you want your wire to be as tight as it can be, and you want to keep on going back over with those needle nose pliers just to kind of make sure everything is flattened and lays well together. When you've reached your desired size for your ring, I use a ring mandrel to start rounding out the band. Your pattern should stop about a bead's width apart. It should not overlap. You'll see in the video where the wires are sticking up, there's a few millimeters of space from where the pattern ends and where those wires intersect. So then you'll leave about 10 inches and you can snip off the excess weaving wire. But you're leaving that 10 inches of weaving wire on your piece, so that way you can attach the bead onto your ring. And then you're just going to take these 18 gauge pieces, and I bend them outward. I kind of use my finger and roll the wire out so that it doesn't leave a sharp turn or angle where you don't really want it. I like bending them out. That way it kind of flows and it looks more like a swirl pattern on the finished product. Once your 4 wires are bent outward, you can put your ring back on the mandrel and gently but firmly hit your ring with the hammer. This part is a little bit awkward since the ring isn't fully closed up yet, but the process is important. As you're hitting the ring, The pressure is hardening and strengthening the wire that you just wove on your band. So it's less likely that your ring is going to bend out of shape as you're continuing to work. We do repeat this process a few more times in the future, especially after the ring is already secured. So you don't have to, hit it super hard, but just enough to kind of hold it in its shape. Just be very careful in this stage so that you don't accidentally bend it out of place. Now you can take your bead and put it onto that tail end of the weaving wire that we had left behind. The bead should sit in the center of the 4 bent wires. You'll see in the video when the wire goes through the bead, I wrap that weaving wire around the 18 gauge pieces about once or twice before sending it back through the bead. It also allows for those 4 18 gauge pieces to be a more decorative swirl around the bead at the end, rather than actually holding the gemstone. I like using beads for rings because you get that extra sense of security having it tied onto the frame of the ring. I've made rings in the past with cabochons, which are flat-backed stones, but you just have to be careful where you're putting the larger wires when you're making a ring with a cabochon, because in the past I've accidentally left too much space and I've accidentally lost my gemstone off of my ring because it just kind of slipped out. So I feel like with this, you don't really have to worry as much because you know for sure that that ring is structurally sound. Now that your ring is a little bit more secured, we can go ahead and put the ring back onto the ring mandrel, and we're going to gently hammer the ring band again. Remember to be firm with the hammering, but you don't want to hit it so hard that it's bending the wire out of place. This step is a little bit awkward, especially with those 4 18 gauge wires still sticking up, so just do your best to kind of hold them in place as you're working on this step. Then I squeeze the band to see how much movement there is or how much more I still need to hammer in the future. Now I start to bend the wires. I like to do the underside where your finger is going to be sitting on the ring first, just so that way I can make sure that those pieces appear to be even before moving on to the top step. It doesn't really matter too much which of the wires are being used for the under or the upper, but you do want to make sure that you're using the opposite ones. So if you're using the upper left wire to go underneath of the bead, you're going to want to use the lower right to make the other piece of the underneath of the ring. So you're just using 2 opposing sides. And we want the wires to sit more towards the underside edge of the bead. I use my finger again to help curve the wire. And when you have the pieces where you want them, you're going to bend them outward and over the band to secure them in place. We then take the 2 upper wires and we repeat a similar curve like we made underneath. So you're just taking those outer wires, you're bending them either with your finger or with your tools, and just making a gentle curve around the outer edge of the stone. I've made other rings where this is pretty much the last step. So you would just kind of wrap those wires around the band as much as you'd like, and then snip them off, and this alone can be a final product. But the more that I kept on staring at this ring, the more I realized how much extra wire that I had on the end, and I really felt like it could use just a little bit more detail. So what I'm doing here is I took the extra pieces from the underneath wires and I kind of curved them over the top to make them kind of fit the same curvature of the other wires that I just bent in place. So now it's kind of double layering those wires just to give it a little bit more of a decorative flair to it. But again, this step is optional, of course. I'm going to be posting another YouTube video showing the other way, so stay tuned if you'd like to see how that one turns out. But again, this step was optional. I just felt like this ring in particular just needed a little bit extra. That is probably my favorite part of wire wrapping jewelry, is that you can follow the same steps, but the end result is going to have its own uniqueness every time. I've made 5 of these rings this week, and each one looks entirely different, even though I followed the same steps and used the same weave. So now that those wires are lined up to make the double-edged border, and I tuck the extra wire underneath and bring it back over the top. You don't want to snip the wire underneath of the ring, even though it would look more aesthetically pleasing to have the cut wire underneath of the ring, but you have to be mindful again because this is part of your band. So I prefer to have the cut wire laying over the top of the band to allow for a more comfortable wear. When snipping the wire, you can cut it just a little bit past the band and then use needle nose pliers to bend the wire downward so that the top of your ring looks finished and the rough edge isn't sticking out, which can catch on your clothes. You can also go back with your needle nose pliers or your round tip pliers to adjust the wire and make sure that your design is laying how you want it to look. You can also go back with your wire cutters to snip any rough spots or file them down a little bit. Go ahead and make any minor adjustments that you need to, making sure that there's no sharp edges or anything that would be poking you while you would be wearing it. To put it back on your ring mandrel and hit it with the hammer again. Now that you have the finished ring, this is just going to lock everything in place and strengthen that wire so that way it doesn't bend out of place. And that's it, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this ring tutorial. I had so much fun making it. Subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be posting some new wire wrapping tutorials coming soon. And give this video a thumbs up and comment below to help out my new channel. I'm going to be posting some new videos coming soon of other ring styles and necklaces that I'm working on. So stick around and see what comes next. Thanks, guys.